Those of you, thank you, Sante. Those of you who were listening to the radio today know that there was a meltdown on radios all over New York City with the panelists who stepped forward into our microphones today. At one point, I had to check to see if we were still on the air because they were throwing down some very serious business. And it's some business that deals out of a dimension that relates to what I call the information age. I've made a statement that many of you have heard before, that in the information age, what you don't know can kill you. And what we're beginning to see is that there are people who understand that in the information age, what you do know can build you. And as we begin to build this pyramid of consciousness, people are getting very upset. They're getting extremely upset. I saw a phenomenon take place before I went to Kemet with Dr. Ben, where an 8-page article came out on me in a magazine called Harper's. This is a magazine that you really only see if you happen to be in your dentist's office. And that's the only way you would ever read it, basically. Because it's not a magazine directed to our community at all. If you were in your doctor's office or your dentist's office, you might happen to see it and you might pick it up by accident. So I saw this 8-page piece in which they attempted to analyze my show. At one point, the writer said that I had the unique ability to make people angry without ever raising my voice. He called it the only radio show with an ideology that life is a Darwinian struggle for racial advantage. It is, and he was right. We understand that. We're very, very clear about that. Life is a Darwinian struggle for racial advantage. There are things that people have not wanted us to know. They are scared to death that we know now. Today on our broadcast, at one point, when I'm in the middle of that thing and I'm sharing my thoughts and I'm in the middle of it, it's like lightning bolts that are going on, and the brothers are throwing and oh man, see that one, And what's great is that I can see the brothers and sisters because we have the live audience, and I see them get short. Many of us have experienced. I've been the beneficiary, just as many of you have, over the last several years, of a tremendous amount of information that has changed me, it has changed my life, it has transformed my consciousness. We are approaching the 21st century. Why should we think that we're going to operate with the same information as brothers and sisters who preceded us? It is our obligation to surpass them and all that they do and all that they do. But we can only do it through the efforts of brothers and sisters who somehow manage to figure out in their life survival plan how to put the kind of concentration together that ultimately results in the books, ultimately results in the lectures and the dialogues and so forth, that when we hear them, we find that we can listen to them for whether it be 30 seconds or 30 minutes or 3 hours and literally have our consciousness completely transformed. That's what we're talking about when we talk about the names that we have here tonight. Dr. John Henry Clarke, Dr. Amos, and of course, attorney Alton, Maddox. I've had a lot of reporters come to me lately. I started seeing, this is the same show we've been doing, the past 7 years or so, and I've been to New York now. I found out recently, which was interesting, I have the longest running black radio program in the history of New York in 22 years. I always have to tell people in terms of urban sharp, and I say, well, I started when I was 5, so just a young brother, right? But what has happened is, and what we're beginning to observe and beginning to see, is that radio as a medium can be used in ways that we haven't used it before. I was a DJ for a number of years, and when I attempted to start doing the things that I was doing on the radio at that time, I did them because I just wasn't satisfied. I couldn't keep playing 22 minutes of music in a row and 58 minutes of this and that. I said, we we got to do something because this is too valuable a tool. I've been very blessed and very fortunate that because of brothers and sisters like yourself, I've been able to maintain that kind of position. In 1971, when I was in danger of losing my position for doing some of the same things that I do today, it was H. Rap Brown who called the general manager of the radio station. It was the Black Panther Party who called until they burned the station down and they didn't know what happened. So I know how I'm there. I know why I'm there, and I made a very specific My dedication is to my community. My dedication is to the global Black experience. That is what we are doing. Now, you know, I had, let's see, 60 Minutes sent over 3 reporters. I said, who? 60 Minutes? Son, what are they here for? No cameras, what is it? They wanted to just sit, hang out at the radio show. People just there to hang out, they said. They just wanted to just kind of suck it all up or something, you know. Governor Cuomo called in the middle of the broadcast that they came. And Cuomo called with Reverend Sharpton sitting right next to me. And we were having a conversation. And you know me and I like to talk. So we're just talking back and listen. Somebody handed me with me for him to do it. Oh, Reverend Sharpton, the governor is on the line. He wants to come on to talk. This is right in the Crown Heights situation. So I said, okay. So I said to Reverend, I said, you down with this? He said, sure, no problem with it. I said, okay. I said, well, tell the governor he can join us in the conversation at 1 o'clock, right after the news. So the message came back to me, and as this message was being given to him, in walked Reverend Herbert Daughtry and Attorney Colin Moore. Now, I didn't look at coming, you know, they were just coming to hang out, you know. And so I said, well, let's send another message to the governor and let him know that my other guests are Reverend Herbert Daughtry, Attorney Colin Moore, and Reverend Sharpton, and he can come on and he can talk and say what he has to say. And we'd like to talk. The governor said that he didn't want to have a conversation with them. He just wanted to talk to me. You come into my living room, I have members of my family, not guests. And you say you want to just talk to me and not the members of my family? No kind of disrespect like that. Not today. Not today with where we are. Not at this. But the point I make here, though, is that the divide and conquer tactic was at work in the moment. Now, CBS came to ask me these questions, and where did this show come from? From outer space somewhere. The next day after CBS came, Peter Jennings' World News Tonight called. They sent a camera crew. 2 weeks after that, the New York Post article came out. Harper's, CBS, ABC, the New York Post. So now I know what that means. We're talking about target practice. But I want them to understand I'm protected by a much higher force than they've ever come to understand. I began to try to put together, going into the Crown Heights situation, what was our experience? What was our perception? Why did people think that it just happened at Crown Heights? Why did they think it was one single incident that made the Black community say, enough is enough? Why were we saying no justice, no peace? Why did we keep saying that? So when the reporters kept asking, I said, I need to write something, And I wrote a little something, which will introduce our program for this evening because it deals with the very subject that we're going to talk about, which is global white supremacy. This is no justice, no peace, just a bit of it. your face in the crowd. Yo, brother, man, you looking proud. Sister love, you got it too. I wish they all could be like you. We are people with a job to do. Struggle to us is nothing new. Historic, running through our minds with images of every kind. Cowboys and Indians, we all rooted for them to win. Wars, we were proud to fight, but they never did try to treat us right. Hair had to be like theirs, thin nose, blue eyes, and oh so fair. School, where there was no book with people who looked like you. Time and time again, there were those who tried to do us in, but survive we did. And here we are, we had to come from very far. And now we say that this must cease. With no justice, there is no peace. We say, no justice, no peace. Check it out, racism must cease. Then he say, no justice, no peace. We got to take it to the streets. Now check this out. No other people around the world have had their families stolen, hurled across the land or over the sea. The branches of our family tree, we too have a Holocaust, and millions gone were killed and lost. They didn't come by invitation, they were brought here to build a nation. We slaved and worked this land. I'm talking about the Africans, the ones their ships went out to raid, the ones understand never paid. Now we, the children of the sun, are the new generation under the gun. We watch today on TV news as groups of angry Hasidic Jews storm into a police station, suffer no kind of retaliation. Put a single black man in that situation, and he'd be dead by assassination. No justice, no peace. We say racism must cease. We say no justice, no peace. Indeed, it's time to take it to the streets. And that's what it's about, brothers and sisters. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. Racism must cease. And when we say racism must cease, we are talking about global white supremacy. Let us begin our program tonight by introducing our very distinguished panel. They are all very honored brothers. We start with the first, who is our honored elder, Dr. John Henry Clarke. Also in the house, let me bring up Attorney Alton Maddox and Dr. Amos Wilson. In relationship to what took place today, and what we began to do with, most of you know the format, our programming today and this evening is going to deal with this particular subject of global white supremacy from three different perspectives. The historical perspective, the psychological perspective, and the legal perspective. They are all very much tied together. We'll begin the proceedings this evening with Dr. John Henry Clarke on the historical issue of global white supremacy. Dr. Clarke.
Thank you very much. One of the main reasons we don't understand is that we don't understand white people, and we don't understand how old we were when we discovered the world. Half of human was over before we knew there was anything in the world that identified itself as being white. We had already built enduring civilization. The pyramids were already there. Nile Valley civilization was already there. There was peace. There was no Rome. before we knew there were people called white. For years, no people in the world were identified by a color. White people as white by identification is a creation of the 15th and the 16th century. I don't mean they began to exist then, but they began to identify themselves by color then. Yellow people were not identified as yellow, blacks were not identified as blacks. And the first inkling of intelligence we know came out of Europe about 1250 BC. A piece of folklore, the Odyssey and the Iliad, written by a person named Homer. We're not too clear whether Homer was man or woman. Living in those caves, the caves are kind of dark. They would develop a gender situation different from the tropical people who live out into the light.
Right.
So now, my point is that if you built enduring civilizations before you knew he existed, laid the basis of the world religions, the basis for science, the basis for social thought, built systems more perfect than anything called socialism, built social orders better than anything he later called Christianity, built it without a dogma and without a book. You didn't proclaim it to be so, you just lived it out. Once you proclaim something to be so, I suspect you don't believe it. Now, so the African never said in his spiritual way of life, I am my brother's keeper. He just kept it. That people have no state. That people have no specific name. That people, being raised in cold and ice, develop a temperament. A temperament that would later threaten the whole world. An icebox temperament. Just like the Arab developed a sand temperament. Slave traders, we will not deal with this. And I'm not dealing with it tonight, but I'm saying that there are too many closed doors in history. We got to open and examine, etc. Now, what interfered with this African peaceful way of life? Well, there were no jails because no one had ever gone to one. No orphanages because no one had ever thrown away children. No old people's home because no one ever threw away grandma. What happened with the coming of farmers? I'm trying to deal with now his discovery of us. And what he discovered about us is something we still do not know about ourselves that fastens him on our back and makes him disrupt our nation, our family life, our individual relationship, one to the other. We have always been, and we still are, the world's richest people. There have always been people coming from stingy climate who wanted to take what we had without paying for it. And so to take what we had without paying for it, they've got to establish a rationale to say that we are less than other human beings deserving less consideration. These same people will adopt a religion and say God is good, God is kind. But they will solicit their God to assist them in oppression, therefore making God ungodly. Because all organized Western religion, and that includes Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, a male chauvinist murder cult. They've always used religion as a rationale for taking away the freedom of other people, infringing upon the rights of other people in the name of their God. Therefore, taking the godliness from their God and making him a partner in that crime. Right. Now, the sand people came out of scarcity, and the ice people came out of scarcity. They would launch an assault on some people who had plenty because nature had favored them. They would create concepts. The concept of the chosen by God. And if you say God chose you to do something for another people over and above other people, then God is a bigot. Then if another one say, I will declare holy war on you because you don't belong to my faith. That everything within my faith is an abode of peace, and everything outside of my faith is an abode of war. Then you sing, God is a cutthroat and a thug. These people came among a people who had a different way of life. This may be painful to you to know this, but I say to the everlasting credit of African people, they gave the world no religion. What the African people gave the world is higher than religion. They gave it universal spirituality. All religion, no exception, all religion was taken from the universal spirituality created by God. The is against the poor use they made of these religions. Right. There was nothing basically wrong with creating these religions. There's something wrong with what they did with it, because all of them indulged slavery. Exactly. Notice that. Notice that. If God is grace and God is love, then God is not an endorser of slavery. Now, how then did he come out of this icebox? And it is much you have organized religion, organized societies in Western Asia, North Africa, great city states down the coast of East Africa, organized cities in inner Africa, the Sudan, coal mining. We read so few pages of a book, if you just read a whole book once in a while. Just pick up one Shaking that deal books and read from cover to cover. J.C. DeGrasse Johnson's little book, African Glory, you can read that in one evening. Professor Joseph Harris' book, Africa in their African people in their history, you can read that in a good long evening. So no one is hiding this information from you, and I'm not telling you anything that I didn't get from books and documents, gathered dust in libraries that's open to you as well as me. Now I'm trying to put this in some kind of sequence. At what point in human history did we see someone who would later call themselves European? I maintain that the Greeks and the Romans have no just claim for being European, and that Europe assisted them in no way in coming into being, because at the time of Greece and Rome, there was no Europe. There was a single European organized state. Yet every Scandinavian schoolboy can claim Greece and Rome as part of its intellectual heritage. Egypt stretches 4,000 miles into Africa, because it is a Nile Valley civilization and not an Egyptian civilization.
Yes.
All right. And if people came from the south, because the Nile Valley was a great cultural highway, and Egypt is physically in the body of Africa. So the dispute about Egypt not being African and being white makes no sense. It's a part of global white supremacy, because this inadequate, insecure man who hadn't thought out from the icebox must claim things that didn't belong to him. All right, now, let us, for the sake of conversation, say that Egypt was white. Egypt stretches 4,000 miles into Africa. Egypt emerged when the ice age was just thawing out in Europe. While these Europeans come from under the ice, go all the way to Africa, build the pyramids, go back into Europe under the ice. They stay under the ice 2,000 years before they build a shoe for themselves and a house for the winter. It don't make sense. So if Egypt was white, It got its workers from the South. It got a lot of its material from the South. And the interaction between these white Egyptians and these black Africans going on 3,000 years, could they still be white? Just for a conversation, I make them white. And even that don't make sense. My main point is that with the emergence of Rome and Greece, you better stop thinking about Rome and Greece as being part of Europe, because there wasn't no Europe for it to be part of. There was no functioning Europe. Rome and Greece began to appear at the time the ancient African world was about over. Europe was not a part of the ancient world. Europe emerged at the beginning of the present modern world. And if you read a work called Europe in the Modern World, Coulson and Palmer, they said there was no Europe in ancient times. Now, who was there to feed Rome and Greece? These two Mediterranean nations got their impetus from islands in the Mediterranean, Crete, Minoans, Western Asia, and from Egypt. And finally they got themselves together. And once they got themselves together, just at the time Africa, after nearly 10,000 years of civilization, was in decline, they got hungry. And like a spiteful child, turned on its intellectual mother and father. Now, global white supremacy started with the smugness and the arrogance of the Romans and the Greeks. But they were better intellectually. But while saying better intellectually, they were still sending their children to African school.
That's right.
After Greece got it underway, Africa had suffered several invasions from Western Asia, mistakenly called the Middle East. And one of the last of these terrible invasions, 550 BC, the Africans cried out, "Oh God, if you cannot send me a liberator, send me a conqueror who will show mercy." Now, when the young Alexander knocked at the door, weary of Western Asian conquerors, and having no concept of race or color as part of their culture, he walked right in. He was a conqueror like all conquerors. He was a raider like all of them. He raided the granary of Egypt. And while there, the first thing he noticed is that Africa was the home of the Greek gods. Zeus and Apollo came from that. And he wrote his mother, "At last I've come to the home where Greece started." He recognized it, said it, put it down, and began to steal from African libraries and send it to his schoolmaster, Aristotle. Right. Aristotle rearranged these books and put his name on it, and they helped to lay the basis for Greek philosophy. Now here's called the Greek stealing, white supremacy through the colonization of other people's culture and calling it their own. Right. They would do the same thing with countries. Finally, Alexander in this group loses power after beginning something which we have not discussed. It is disaster among us sometimes, but we don't even talk about it. Bastardization. Begin to bastardize, blacken down, lighten up, decomplexion, create a generation with a confusion between whether they should be loyal to their mother's people or their father's people. All right. We still got them around. Don't know the way home, go knock at their father's door, say, you don't belong to me. He signed you, but no, got no home in your father's house. They come among us and expect special privileges. And most of the time they get them. We're not too clear sometimes as to who's loyal to who. Now I'm not dealing with, when I deal with bastardization, I deal with the physical bastardization, but I also deal with the mental bastardization. I know blacks who are black as tar, who are stone traders. You can mutilate the mind, you can mutilate the body. One is as bad as the other. Now, the Romans came into Africa in an act of genocide, the destruction of Carthage. No reason has been given in history for the destruction of Carthage other than the fact that the Romans wanted to control this great commercial city. Now we see the projection of this supremacy in the Mediterranean. This is almost the rehearsal for global white supremacy. The Romans finally began to talk among themselves. Carthage must be destroyed. Yes, Carthage must be destroyed. Good morning, Roman. Good morning, Roman. Carthage must be destroyed. Roman said, yes, Carthage must be destroyed. Good night, Roman. Carthage must be destroyed. Yes, Carthage must be destroyed. Ain't nobody said why. Finally, when they pushed Hannibal back and destroyed Carthage, they had to hire Carthaginians to try to help rebuild it. They'd never seen a city like this. They'd never seen viaducts, water preserves. And the Romans not only destroyed the city, they put salt in the land, plowed salt in the land to keep the crops from growing. The Romans, so accustomed to killing people, started killing animal life. This drove the elephants and all the animal life, lions, out of North Africa. They had to go deep into Africa to find lions for the arena. The Romans began to laugh at people practicing the basis of an early religion called early European formation called Christianity. Now you have to separate Christianity as practiced by the Africans 3,000 years or more before the coming of Christ. You're eventually going to have to get up enough nerve to separate Islam from Africa and Arab, and to make a clear distinction between Islam and Arabism. A whole lot of people didn't make that distinction. That's right. The Arab is a racist dog. That's right. And a slave trader. That's right. White wannabes sometimes are worse than whites. We got to deal with other white wannabes. Right. Because every white wannabe tries to improve his condition with the whites by proving to them they can hold us in check. Right. Certain ethnic groups are assigned to hold us in check. and they get their brownie points with white to the extent they can do that. Now, these Romans began to persecute people called Christians. They began to have fun, entertainment, killing these Christians. Then finally one day, a Roman emperor looked down in the arena and saw his uncle being among the Christians going to be killed. Well, he's crazy anyway, let him go. The next Saturday, he looked down at his wife and son was there. Stop this show. They had joined the religion. Constantine, a degenerate, made Christianity the official religion of the Holy Roman Empire. Now if you're so sacred now, thin skinned, I'm trying to prove to you that a lot of global white supremacy came through the religions of the world. Judaism, Christianity, and a special rationalization for slave trade came through Islam. Exactly. I'm saying that none of these three religions have proven to be our friend. In their invasion of Africa, in their influence in Africa, they misinterpreted the African interpretation of their religion. Instead of effecting a wedding between themselves and Africa's interpretation of the same religion, they turned on the African interpretation and enslaved his mind and subsequently enslaved his body. Everybody that came into Africa did Africa more harm than good. The African never understood these people. Didn't understand them then, don't understand them now. When Christianity became the religion of the Holy Roman Empire, Rome declared war on the African Christian for the control of the church. It's a little known war in history. My point is that global white supremacy manifests itself in that no matter what they believe and say they believe, religiously or politically, they are going to be in charge. Right. All right. And that racism does not stop at the door of communism or socialism or Christianity or Islam or Judaism. I am not asking you to discard any religion that you belong to. I'm telling you to convert everything that you belong to into an instrument of liberation or throw it into the ash can of it. As the major sufferers of racism, you should not belong to racist institutions or rationalize about any of it. Now, after the Roman mismanagement of this church reached the point of disgrace until the African Christian turned on the Roman Christians, there were more Africans killed in the arena, in the amphitheaters of North Africa than in the arena in Rome. You know about the arena in Rome because Caesar Peter Mills have told you about it. But nobody made any great movies about all the murder of the African Christians. Now, after this period and the corruption and the fight, the internal fight within the Christian church in North Africa, Byzantium, Southern Europe, and Western Asia, the African grew disenchanted over the mutualization of a religion he had created. A camel boy delivering goods for his uncle began to grumble and talk to other camel boys. He was not a great reader now. Most people do not know that most of our gods could not read and write. Buddha might have been an exception. But I didn't say he wasn't brilliant. A whole lot of brilliant people can read and write. And then he asked for reform. Had he gotten reform, he might have been satisfied. Failing to get reform, he called for a new religion. This new religion was Islam. Africans saw that Islam, a new force, would help them get the Romans off of their back. They were right. Islam got the Romans off of the Africans' back, but replaced the Romans on the Africans' back. And yet the African was the military arm of that religion almost for the first 1,000 years of its existence. It was an African general that would take them into Spain, Jabal Tarak, Tarak bin Azad, with two Africans, Zayd bin Harit, the first military man of the faith, Bilal, the first Mazoom, the caller of the prayer, who the prophet wanted as his successor. How different this religion would have been had this Ethiopian taken over the faith. Now, the Africans and the Arabs had pushed the European out of the Mediterranean. He's going to block the European into that Mediterranean for the next 800 years. Found it as grumbling within Europe itself. They are hungry. And an offbeat Peter the Hermit began to complain about the Arabs preventing them from going to the holy places, see the Holy Grail. So they're going to rescue the Holy Grail. But the Holy Grail itself, which is another myth, wasn't in danger, nor was it lost. Now the basis of the crusade is this. The Catholic Church, in raising money for those big cathedrals and all that gold piping where the priests lived like gods, were fleecing the people. And they created something called purgatory. Grandma is not in heaven. Grandma is in purgatory. So you give them so much money, they're going to pray grandma from purgatory into heaven. It was a religious racket. And when it pinned up, when the pulse pinned up inside of Europe to turn on the church for it, the Crusades came and Europe had a drain off. So the Pope let them march. And they go marching across Europe and they forget their case. This might be a stereotype, but it's almost like a black man sometime when he gets angry with you, I say, avoid him 24 hours, he might forget about it. But we're passion killers. If we don't kill you in a hurry, we might forget about it. Now, These crusades, mostly raping parties, the famines and the plague left Europe drained, left Europe hungry. They had forgotten longitude and latitude. They would learn this from the University of Salamanca, where the Africans and the Arabs had preserved the maritime skill coming out of China. The Europeans would take this information, build ships again, and turn on the people who preserved it. They were on their way to Asia and discovered big Africa in the way. They would begin the sanction of the slave trade. Now, a little-known sailor said that for 23 years I sailed up and down the Guinea coast. What Christopher Columbus doing up and down the coast of West Africa for 23 years? Before 1492. He was in the Portuguese slave trade.
All right.
The Europeans came down the coast of West Africa, taking slaves, trading in commodities at first, then slaves. But it wasn't much for the slave to do between the time they entered in 1438, the time they took the first large number of slaves out in 1442. After 1492, it would get on the way. But 1455, in a dispute between Spain and Portugal, after the Africans had lost a great part of Spain, Africans and the Arabs, the Pope would say to Spain and Portugal, you are both authorized to reduce to servitude all infidel people. Now you see the church sanction of what's going to become global white supremacy. Most of the infidels were black. They came down the coast of West Africa looking for an emperor called Prester John, an African Christian who they thought would help them. Having not found them, they would turn on the very Africans that they said in their early journals was as civilized to the marrow of their bones. Now this dirty trade is getting underway. The slave trade would rescue the economy of Europe and install global white supremacy. It would introduce the plantation system in the Caribbean islands. Its brutality would start the revolts in the Caribbean islands. It would start a concept of scientific racism. They would again turn to the scriptures to justify racism. Most of the sea captains were not only racist, but they were Christian racists who get a load of ships and pray for a good wind to take them away. And one of the famous hymns in the church, How Sweet the Name of Jesus Sounds, was written by a slave master, a slave captain. Now you can see now how Christianity was recruited to justify the partnership between the European and his religion and the enslavement of the African. You can see how the chosen people concept was a rationale for the Hebrew cooperation with the trade. A rationale is to clear your consciousness. It's like the Mormons said that we have no souls. So if something's done to you, you have no soul, then there's no guilt. There's no guilt to declare you a people without a soul. and to create a rationale that I'm doing this to spread enlightenment. Many of the Catholics would sprinkle them. Now my point is that after 1600, the world would never be the same again. England had entered the trade. The Pope had justified the trade from the point of view of the Catholic Church. Scholars had began a concept of scientific racism. The European continued the racism started by Rome and Greece. And this would continue until the fight against slavery was not a fight against slavery for benevolent reasons, but because it became unwieldy and everybody who could afford one had one. And they were breeding them in any way. England was never sincere in this regard. In the United States, slavery was basically a New England business. The South had no ships to send to go bring back any slaves. The Yankee clipper outran the British ship, and this is the basis of the War of 1812. Now, I'm going to try to sum this up because I feel the Baptist preacher in me getting the best of me. We did not idly take any of this. In the United States, we had 100 years of slave revolts. In the Caribbean islands, they had more than 100 years of slave revolts. Only their revolts were more successful than ours because they had a culture continuity. You might not think it looking at Caribbean people, listening to Caribbean people today, that they have a great revolutionary heritage when they're running to other people's bloodstream. In the United States, we fought longer and harder. But there was no victory for us because we were surrounded all the way. Of all the Africans away from home, this black American had the hardest fight and still have the hardest fight and have the least understanding. You have the least understanding from other African people of his plight. We have to rise each morning and beg for the right to live to the end of the day. Europe dumped its human garbage can into the New World. The worst of that garbage can was dumped into the United States. But at the end of the 19th century, 100 years of slave revolts in the United States, 100 years of rebel revolts in the Caribbean islands, 100 years of anti-colonial revolts in Africa. The African world began to come together at the end of that 19th century. H. Sylvester Williams began to develop a concept of Pan-Africanism. The Caribbean islands began to demand some form of constitutional government. The great literature of solidification and self-identification was coming from a large number of Caribbean scholars. They had been coming to the United States since the early 18th century. They did not identify themselves as Caribbean scholars. We did not call ourselves names. We did not identify islands. We stopped boasting about whether slave ships put us down, because all of us were sure where the slave ship took us from. All of us came fighting and bleeding and hoping from that magnificent 19th century into the 20th century. And while we have not understood ourselves as well as we should in the 20th century, that we have not understood that 19th century. That was the basis of Pan-African nationalism. I see no hope of overcoming global white supremacy for African people except a world union of African people throughout the world.
Yeah, you came over on different ships, but you all in the same boat now. You understand that person? I know it. No doubt. Well, we continue in this discussion. This is about commercial interruption. And I like this vibration. A bit earlier today on our broadcast, the next brother who is about to come up and speak sent many of us on a psychological star trip. I'm talking about galactic stuff. Now, we had a program tonight that was called The Effects of Global White Supremacy. And when this brother began talking about the psychological effects, he pointed out to us that perhaps we were limiting the domain of the conversation in a way that was impractical, considering where the world was moving to and where it had come from in most recent years. He pointed out that the United States had landed on the moon. And that since they had landed on the moon, we could no longer call it global white supremacy. You don't have to call it galactic white supremacy. Because when they landed on the moon, as was pointed out today, they did not plant a flag for the United Nations. They planted a flag in red, white, and blue, beginning the colonial exploration of our space. That is where he comes from. That is the kind of perspective that he shares with us in terms of opening up our minds to the effects, psychologically speaking, of global white supremacy. Let us welcome Dr. Amos.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be back here with you this evening. It's been a while. I want to thank you very much for your response to our last publication, Black on Black Violence. It has been magnificent. We're asking you to look forward to about 3 other publications starting around December. One dealing with maximizing the intelligence of African American children, which we expect to be out toward the end of November. Another dealing with European historiography, and a third dealing with European diagnoses. But our main magnus opus will bear, at this point, the working title, Educating the African American Child for the 21st Century. And that's a working title. We're going to offer you about 500 or 600 pages of real working advice for getting our generation ready to end white supremacy. I want you also to look forward to some communications flyers from the Pan-African Research and Development Foundation and its subsidiary organization called, for now, the African Scholarum. We have just acquired a new space on 138th Street in the Bronx. And from there, we will enter a phase of economic development, and we will discuss and develop theories and approaches in terms of international economic development, military strategy, and other very practical and real political means of overcoming the situations that we are in. We're going to ask you in the future then to join with us over there to build a loan fund and an economic fund. Brother Maddox anticipated me today when he talked about the central bank. We were already moving in that direction and the whole bit, so stay tuned. We at the Pan-African Research and Development Foundation are very, very much concerned with combining scholarship, combining research with very practical results. And those of you who have an interest in putting your knowledge to work, I hope then you would look forward to working with us. We're going to talk a bit today about the effects of white global supremacy. And as I mentioned this morning, we are now dealing here with what I might call the effects of white galactical supremacy, in that the European has entered the space race and is expecting to duplicate in space what he has done on this globe, to colonize space itself and to carry his racist orientations into the very universe. I've often talked about this phase of European development in terms of what it means for Africans and what African and an Afrocentric education must be about. The European of Star Wars, we have a situation here today with all types of exotic weaponry. We spoke this morning about psycholinguistics. And it's interesting that the European calls Star Wars Strategic Defense Initiative. And this has deceived many people. Against whom is the European defending himself in space? What we really must recognize here is a strategic offensive initiative. The European placing weaponry so far above the earth that no other nations can meet him there and destroy those weapons. It means then that the European will place himself in a position to rain weapons on the African continent and of African people with impunity. African flying jet planes and so forth will not be able to stand up against this type of warfare. This is why I've often urged people to understand that the education of our children and the education of ourselves goes beyond preparing for jobs. It speaks to the defense of our very lives. And therefore, African education and Afrocentric education must take us into the space age, where we must again prepare to fight a battle of liberation. We see here, and some years ago, I saw magazines called Commercial Space. The European already exploring the commercial uses of space, the mining of planets. I've told people if you're in the transportation business, you should already be planning transportation to and for from the moon and other planets. If you're in the trucking business, you have to now start thinking about trucking merchandise, people, and other wares to the planets. If the European is able to find minerals and other kind of wealth on the planet, he will not, on other planets, he will not even have to pay the African for the wealth that he steals from him today. We are seeing here then a situation where the European is seeking to gain supremacy over the total universe. His drive for total control has not been subdued by any means. He is seeking to control life itself. If you read the New York Times this week, Monday, October 21st, 1991, you'll see on the front page, U.S. seeks patents on genetic codes, setting off furor. Health agency bypasses normal procedure of waiting until genes' role is known. So here people want to patent the very sources of life themselves, the genes, and to make people pay for licenses to derive benefits from their functioning. It states here, in a move that has set off an international scientific furor, the federal government is seeking to patent hundreds of human genes before knowing what role they play in the body. So just as they are planting the flag on the moon, before they know what it contains, they now want to plant a flag on the very basis of human life, the genetic codes, before they know what they are all about. And he goes on to talk about courts having allowed researchers to patent human genes, which means, of course, in essence, the European wants to create new forms of life and hold patents on those new forms of life. But until now, researchers have applied for patents only after they have determined a gene's role in the body and its potential commercial uses. In a sharp departure from that practice, officials of the National Institutes of Health applied in June for a patent that would cover rights to 340 pieces of genetic code, most of which have yet to be deciphered. Officials said they may soon apply for a second patent that would cover an additional 1,500 sequences. Although genes are products of nature, the courts have ruled that a gene may be patented if it has been isolated and purified in a way that is not found in nature. A very interesting situation here. But top scientists in the United States and Europe say they fear that the move could start a scientific version of a land rush. So you see again how history just repeats itself in new forms and new shapes. But the basic orientation continues. With billions of dollars at stake for the same motives, billions of dollars at stake, in which governments and companies race to claim territory on the sets of genes that govern everything in the body before actually unraveling the secrets of this human genome. So what do we have? The United States and Europe still trying to claim the bodies of all people and claim the very basis of life itself. As they say, the French say, the more things change, the more they remain the same. We see it going on and on again. What is white supremacy? We'll look quickly in the light of our time situation here to George Frederickson's definition, viewing white supremacy as referring to the attitudes, ideologies, and policies associated with the rise of blatant forms of white or European domination over non-white populations. It's very important that we understand the nature of this thing we call white supremacy. Related to that definition, of course, is the one dealing with racism, I think best expressed by David T. Wellman in his book, Portraits of Racism. Racism can be seen to systematically provide, and this is why it is not going to pass away until we destroy it ourselves. It can be seen to systematically provide economic, political, psychological, and social advantage for whites at the expense of blacks and other people of color. The determining feature of race relations is not prejudice toward blacks. but rather the superior position of whites and institutions, ideological as well as structural, which maintain it. We don't have time to explain this particular definition, but I think it's very interesting in that it speaks to an issue we often get caught up on, and that is one of viewing racism as an expression of attitudes, as an expression of stereotypes. But racism moves far beyond stereotypes. Whites can refuse to express stereotypes and racist attitudes in public and still maintain their positions of supremacy. In fact, as they secure their institutions, as they secure economic control, as they secure technological superiority, they reduce quite often their racist invective. However, their supremacy and control over the lives and destinies of African people continues, if not really increases in its potential. Therefore, we cannot waste a lot of time in looking at racism as mere expressions of attitudes and mere expressions of stereotypes. We must look at the very organization of European society itself as the basis for white supremacy. The very structure and functionality of European institutional structures and legal systems and other ideologies, and our believing in those ideologies, and our believing that we must submit ourselves to those laws that maintains supremacy. For we'll find, as I have warned audiences before, that white racism at some point will appear to be faceless, in that it will not be immediately obvious, but it will still continue to operate. Racism is more effectively analyzed as a strategy for the maintenance of privilege than as prejudice. If we view racism as a culturally sanctioned, and I'm still reading Wellman here, rational response to struggles over scarce resources. And this is the thing I wish we had time to talk about today. And I talk about this often in terms of what it means to be a man and what manhood means and what men are developed for and the role of men in the world. Because we have to recognize the fundamental fact that people have to struggle over resources, and men must be prepared to win those struggles for their people.
Right, yeah.
And we have to keep that in mind. And we can account for its widespread character and avoid the inconsistencies and meaningless distinctions that arise when it is viewed as prejudice. In other words, racism is about the distribution of wealth. It's about the